Today we'll break down the three key tokens you'll run into when building modern authentication: ID tokens, access tokens, and refresh tokens. You'll learn what those tokens are for and see exactly how to use access and refresh tokens to safely get user information or any other information your application needs from a resource API that accepts access token. And stick around until the end because I'll show you how to make your logout feature much more robust by revoking tokens and destroying sessions. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just the theory, but also have practical code examples to make your app's authentication rock solid. In the previous video, we created authentication for a React app using Amazon Cognito. Although Cognito provided us with ID, access, and refresh tokens, we only used information from ID token that we put in the session and discarded the rest of the tokens. This approach is good when you have a database and all you need is user ID to connect the data. However, sometimes you may want to use Cognito user pool as a full-blown directory and store a lot more information than just user ID and username. On top of that, your application may want to use an API that can be protected with an access token. So let's see how we can use access and refresh tokens. Let's first take a look at ID and access tokens to understand the difference. They are both JWT or JSON Web Tokens. This means we can decode them and see what information they have inside. There is a website called jwt.io, so we're going to paste an ID token in the decoder. Besides the utility information of basically who issued the token and when this token expires, we also have a user-specific information such as ID, it's called sub right here, also email, right, and we have a user name. So this information personally identifies the user, and we can use this information for authenticating a user in our app. So now if we paste access token, we can see that this token also contains the user ID, the sub property. However, it doesn't contain email or name of the user, but it does contain important information called scopes. And you can see the scopes are OpenID, profile, and email. We specified those scopes when setting up Cognito and when configuring Remix Auth library to authenticate our application. These scopes or permissions are used to access the information about the user. If you have an API that accepts an access token, you can add your own scopes to control which data the bearer of the access token can access, no pun intended. In terms of Cognito, you can do that using Lambda triggers, but this is a topic for another video. Finally, refresh token. It looks like a JWT token, but in most cases it is not. If we paste it in the decoder, we can see that it gives us an error. As the name implies, refresh token is used to get new access and ID tokens. For security reasons, access and ID tokens are short-lived, from a few minutes to a few hours. When they expire, you can use a refresh token that can be valid from several days to several years to request new access and ID tokens. And this is what we're going to be doing in our application. Let's jump into the code. I am in auth server.cs file. We configured Remix Auth package to handle authentication with Cognito by using Auth 2 strategy. After auth song and dance is finished, we have a getUser function. This function returns information about the user extracted from ID token. This data is then stored in the session. As you can see, this data doesn't have access or refresh tokens. All we do is make use of ID token to authenticate a user. Let's update the code to also return access and refresh tokens from the getUser function and ultimately store that information in the session. First, we are going to update the user type. We're going to add access token, refresh token, and token expires in. We also going to set optional name and admin. We are still using name and admin in the application. However, when we get the tokens, we're not going to be assigning name or admin because the name information and admin information later on we're going to be getting from the Amazon Cognito. And the most important actually reason is that we are using a cookie driver to store our session, and the cookie driver is limited. You can only store about 4 kilobytes in the session. So when you are using your app in the real world, you will need to use either a database driver for your session storage or Redis. Please stay tuned to the channel, because later on I'm planning to make a video how to use a database driver or Redis driver for your session storage. So if we go to the get user function, you can see that our code is a little bit different. Now we're going to have access token that we will get with the access token method, and a refresh token that we're going to use, again, refresh token method to get it from tokens. We also add property expires in. It's just basically the access token expiration in seconds multiplied by 1000, because the date expires in, the date now is in milliseconds. This token expires in will tell us when the token is expired, so we're ready to refresh token, and this information is also returned on the payload with access and ID and refresh tokens according to Auth 2.0 standard. Next, let's create API client.ts file, and it will be a class in app services folder. We're gonna put the following code here. This code looks a little bit involved, but bear with me and I will explain it to you. So first, we're going to import Axios and Axios types from Axios, and also we'll use Axios retry library. I like to use Axios because it has good things such as interceptors, and it is also have a little bit better API than the fetch API. And obviously you can use Axios retry, so you can retry your calls if you have, for example, 500 or whatever HTTP call you can receive. You can configure Axios retry. So let's go ahead and install Axios and Axios retry. Next, we're going to import get session and commit session from the session server, authenticator, and the type user from the auth server file, and finally auth 2 strategy from remix auth 2. So we're going to define the class and export it called API client. This class will have several private properties. It's going to be session, strategy, access instance, is, refreshing, and refresh queue. So session, strategy, and access instance are self-explanatory, and is refreshing, we're going to check if we are using or making a call to refresh a token, and refresh queue will be used to put our request on the refresh queue while the token is new tokens are being fetched. So in the constructor, we're gonna pass the session and the base URL. So for now, the base URL will be the Cognito base URL. However, if you creating an API to support this application, your base URL will be the URL of that API, granted that this API will be supporting the access token from the Cognito. So after we assign session and the strategy, and in the strategy, we're going to get this Cognito auth strategy because we defined it in auth server.ts right here. We gave it a name Cognito auth. So the next thing, we're going to create Axios instance where we put base URL and put the headers content type application JSON. Next, we're going to define Axios retry right here. This is pretty simple. So we're going to have 3 retries, exponential delay, and retry condition is going to say is network or idempotent request error, meaning if there is a network error, we're going to retry, or idempotent request, it means the request that doesn't change the information, meaning that's a get request. So those are kind of basic parameters for Axios retry. Next thing that we're going to do is to create Axios request interceptor, and in this interceptor we're going to check before sending the request. We're going to do the following thing, right? We're going to check if the token is expired, right? And this function will simply go and have the expiry date. We're going to get this from token expires in, and we're going to check if the expiry is less than the date now. So if the token is expired, we're going to go ahead and use the refresh token method. So in this method, we're basically check if there is a strategy, because when we're getting strategy from remix auth, maybe the strategy may not exist, right? Then we're going to check if we have the user in the session. Again, if this user does not exist, we're going to throw an error. And finally, we will get the refresh token. Again, we're going to code for the situation where refresh token may not be available. So we're going to throw an error. And finally, if this token is available, we're going to use the strategy, and we're going to call the method refresh token with this refresh token. This will return us the access token that we're going to get. We're going to also receive the new expiry date. So we're going to set those properties on the user and save that user in the session. After we are making sure the token is not expired, right, and we have the access token, we will set this access token in the authorization header bearer token, and then we're going to send the request. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to have a response interceptor. This response interceptor will react to 401 unauthorized error, because although our code can check that the token has not expired yet, but in mid-flight or something, it expires, and then the API may return 401. So we're basically coding for this case. So if we receive the response unauthorized, right, we'll need to get the new token, and while we're getting new token, when it is refreshing, we're gonna queue up requests while refresh is happening. And we're gonna set original request retry to true and is refreshing to true as well. Next, we're gonna use the method refresh access token that we looked at already. And if the refresh is successful, we will be basically retrying the original request. However, if the refresh request is unsuccessful, we're going to catch the refresh error. And then we're going to clear the session. So this will essentially log out the user, because the user needs to log back in. And obviously we'll set is refreshing to false in the finally block. And also, we're going to return reject error in the promise. The next two methods we already looked at, right? If is token expired and the refresh access token. The next is request method, and this is actually a public method, though this method is simply a wrapper around the Axios instance, the request method, and you're basically gonna put configuration as the argument into this request method, the same way you're gonna be putting it as if you were using Axios. And finally, another public method will be commit, because we may be updating access token using the refresh, so right, and we're gonna put it in the session, and at the end we will have to commit this session. Now let's go ahead and use this class in the route dashboard file to request information about the user. So in the route dashboard.tsx file, we're going to import this API client that we just created. The next thing we're going to do as usual, we're going to get the session. We're going to check if the session has a user. If it doesn't, we're going to redirect back to the landing page. However, if the user exists, right, we're going to create an instance of API client, passing in the session and the Cognito domain that we defined earlier in env variable. Next, we're going to make an API request, right? We're going to have API client request, and we're going to pass an option. We'll need to get method get, and the URL will be auth to user info that we're going to be attaching it to the Cognito domain. So the question is, how do we know this URL? Well, simply if we go to the browser right here, and we get OpenID configuration, well-known, if we attach it to Cognito domain, we can see the list of well-known endpoints and information. And right here down below, we have user info endpoint. As you can see, there's a Cognito domain and /auth2 /user info. So we can make a GET request to this endpoint and use the access token to get information about the user. So next, when we get a response, right, we're going to get this data from the response and return it to our dashboard function, right? And also we're going to be using API client commit method, because we don't know whether a token expired or not, right? We may have changed the session, so we will need to commit this. Finally, in the dashboard function or our UI, right, we're going to distract the name from the loader data, because the data that is being returned from the user info endpoint will contain the properties about the user, and we have a name property, and we're going to display it right here saying welcome to your dashboard, and we'll put the username that we got from the user info endpoint. If you would like to learn what other information this user info endpoint returns, you can actually use the Postman, and right here I made a request. I'm using the token, and as you can see, I have user ID, email verify true false. I have name, email, and my username. So the response is pretty straightforward. You just need to destruct the property that you need. Okay, let's go ahead and spin up our application with npm run dev and see if it works. If you're following along, you may see an error like this. This is because our session changed, right? And this is the previous session that we have. So we basically need to clear our cookies. So we can just go into the application right here, and we're going to go into cookies. And this is the cookie that we have. This is our session cookie. You simply delete it. And now you can close this window and go to the root of the application right over here. Okay, you click on the button Get Started. And right here, I got logged in, and it looks like our code is working. We don't get any errors, and this basically name is now coming from the endpoint get user info. This is great. This user info endpoint gives us access to the attributes that can be saved in a Cognito, so we can define some more attributes and use it in our application. So let's go ahead and do just that. We can go to the Cognito user pool, right? And under users, we can see right here we have a couple of users, and if we're gonna click right here on the user, we can also see the attributes that this user has, and we can also add new attributes to this user, right? You can click on add attribute, right? Unfortunately, phone number, verify name, and email is not available because these attributes you need to define during user pool creation. But the other attributes like a profile, address, birthday, gender, and everything else you can create and set the value. But besides these attributes, right, you can also create your own attributes, and this is available in the sign up experience. So if we go right here on the left hand side to sign up experience, or you can simply click on this link, so we're gonna see the custom attributes, and we can click to add a custom attribute. Let's create a custom attribute named role. It will be type of string. Minimum and maximum characters are optional, but I'll put 3 and 255 right here, and we can click Save Changes. Now we created this custom attribute, and you can see it is prefixed with a custom and colon. So we have custom colon role. So now we can go back to users. We can click on this user that we are logged in, click on edit, and now if we add a new attribute, we can see that the custom role is showing up right here. So let's select it, and let's go ahead and set it to admin. After we do that, we can save our changes. Now our user is admin, and we can show to this user the admin page and admin information. Let's go ahead and update our code to do just that. Let's go to the admin.csx file and update our code. Okay, we're gonna paste this new code right here. As usual, we are importing API client, right? We're checking for the session. Again, if there is no user, we're gonna redirect it to the landing page. However, if there is a user, we're gonna again instantiate the API client, passing the session and the Cognito domain. We're gonna make a GET request to auth to user info endpoint, and then in the response data, we're gonna check if we have the property custom role and if it's actually not equals to admin, right? So we can return back to the dashboard, thus disallowing access to the admin. However, if this custom role is admin, we're just gonna return the data, right? And again, we will have to commit the session right here in the using API client commit method, because again, we may have used the refresh token and we may have updated our session with a new access token. And just as an aside, you may notice that, committing session all the time when using API client may be repetitive and not very dry. So you basically can actually create a with a session utility wrapper, right, that you can be using in your loader or in your action, right? And you can just wrap it with session. So where in this with a session, you can basically set up the code to commit your session automatically, so you don't have to do it over and over again. However, this with a session utility is out of scope for this video. We want to keep it a little bit simple for now. So let's take a look at the function admin, right? We're gonna again distract the name, and we're gonna show this name and say this person's name's admin panel, and you can manage your application here. So basically we use the custom role just to determine whether the user is admin or not. Finally, we have the code in the layout, dashboard layout, that basically checks, right, if the user is an admin, it shows this page in the menu, or if user is not, it hides it. So let's go ahead and update this code as well. As usual, we will be importing API client from client, right? We will check the session, right, and instantiate the API client right here. Next, we're going to make a request using API client to the get endpoint user info. And then we're going to be doing again, committing the session using API client.commit and returning the data that we got from the auth to user info endpoint. So first we're going to distract the name and the custom role as role from the loader data. And then we're going to check if the role is admin. We're going to show the admin link. And also we're going to be able to display name again in the navigation bar, since we got the name from the user info endpoint. Let's start the application and see if the code is working. And if we navigate to the browser, you already see we have the name right here displayed, and we also have the admin page available. If we click on this admin page, right, we can get the name of the user, admins panel, and manage your application here. So this is great. The code is working. Finally, as I promised in the beginning, let's make our logout feature more robust. So right now, if we try to log out here, I'm going to get redirected to the landing page. However, if we click on a get started again, you can see we didn't have to enter username and password again. Well, the reason it happens is because the Cognito, when we redirect to the Cognito login page, has also its own session, and it keeps that session. So now when we're redirected to the Cognito login page, it has us in the session, so we don't need to enter username and password. This may be a desirable feature for your application. However, some requirements may be that the user has to enter their password every time they log out. So let's go ahead and destroy that session in a Cognito login page when the user logs out. If we go to a well-known OpenID configuration right here, we can see that we do have a logout endpoint. So we're going to redirect to this endpoint and essentially kill the session there. And besides that, you can notice that we also have a revoke endpoint, right? It is also a good idea when user logs out to revoke all these access tokens, right? Because they may not be expired yet. And I'm going to show you how to do that as well. If we go to auth server.cs file and look at the configuration of the authenticator that we did with the remix auth, we have also right here defined the auth to revoke endpoint, and we will be using it to revoke the token, and we're basically going to be using remix auth strategy to do that. So let's go ahead and go to the logout route and update that. So now in a logout.cs file, we're going to have a little bit more code. We're going to import the authenticator and user type from the auth server.cs file. And again, we're going to import the strategy type from remix auth auth2. So we're going to update the action function that will receive basically a request when we click on a logout button. We're going to get the session, right? Check if we have the user in the session, right? Then we're gonna use the strategy, the Cognito auth strategy. This is the only strategy that we have basically. And if we have that strategy, we will call revoke token method, passing it the refresh token that we have in the session. If everything goes well, the tokens will be revoked. Now we will have to redirect to this logout endpoint. In order to do that, we're attaching to Cognito domain /logout. However, we need to have some URL parameters here. So we're going to have client ID, which we're going to get Cognito client ID from the environment variable, and logout URI. We encode URI component, and the logout URI will be auth logout route. Basically, it's going to be this file, all right, the same route. And we're going to ask Cognito after when we hit that logout URL and the session will be destroyed, please redirect us back to this logout.ts file, and this redirect will be a get redirect, and therefore we have a function right here, loader. So the redirect request will hit the loader function. In this function, we'll get a session, right? And then we're going to be redirecting to the landing page, and we're also going to be destroying our own session. So now when a user clicks on get started, the session will be destroyed, obviously, and they'll have to log in back. Let's go ahead and check if it is working. So let me go ahead and log out. And it took a little bit, so it says invalid request. And the reason this is happening, Cognito is not redirecting us to the logout URL, which is correct, is because we didn't specify that this logout URL is allowed. So let's add this logout URL to our Cognito user pool, so Cognito knows that it's okay to redirect to this URL. So let's head back to the Cognito user pool. We're gonna have to go to API clients. We'll choose our client, and here under login pages, we're gonna click edit. And you can see we have allowed callback URL, right? It filled out as a auth callback in our application. However, there is a section allowed sign out URLs. And what you can do, we can add the URL right here, and just be sure it's HTTP, right? Because we don't have HTTPS protocol locally. We can add this logout URL, scroll all the way down, click Save Changes. Now this URL should be working. Let's go ahead and do another test. Now we're gonna go back to the application on the localhost 5173. Looks like again we have a little bit of a invalid grant error, right? Because we still have the session and it's still mingling. So let's go ahead and clear the session. Okay, we're gonna go click on inspect, select the application, and we're gonna delete this session again. We can go ahead and refresh. And now we're prompted to get started. And after we get started, it asks us to enter the email address and credentials. Let's do just that. And as usual, it prompts us with the authentication code. Let's enter it. All right, after entering the code, we click sign in, and we are signed in. So now if we try to log out, we will be redirected back to our landing page. And now if we click get started, we are prompted to sign in again because the session in a Cognito login page was destroyed, and now we need to re-enter our username and password. Now you know exactly how ID, access, and refresh tokens work, and if you're building your own API, you can use access and refresh token to secure your API applications. In my next video, Node.js REST API Mastery, Build Powerful APIs with Express, I'll show you step by step how to design and build secure, scalable APIs that your front-end apps will love. Click right here to watch it now and start mastering Express.